She was found brutally murdered inside of a church. Was it her husband? Was it the man who found her? An unknown serial killer? Was it the son of Sam? Was it a satanic cult? Well, it would take 44 years to finally find out who did it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Arlis Perry. Viewer discretion is advised. It was a chilly October 13th morning in 1974 in Stanford, California, on the campus of Stanford University. A security guard had locked all of the doors to the Stanford Memorial Church the night prior, and he was sure of it. But when he arrived back at the church during his normal rounds at around 5:45 a.m., one of the doors was now unlocked. When he walks inside the church, he sees an image that will be burned into his brain until the end of his days. Let's rewind the clock just a little bit to about 11 p.m. the night before, October 12th, 1974. Newlywed couple Arlis and Bruce Perry were taking a little strolley-poo around the neighborhood. Yes, it was a late night walk, but, some people do that. Bruce was a pre-med student there at Stanford University. Arlis was a secretary at a nearby law firm. Bruce and Arlis met actually back in Bismarck, North Dakota, because that's where they both were born and raised, and that's where they met in high school. They became high school sweethearts who fell head over heels in love with one another, and they wanted to get married. Bruce, though, was 1 year ahead of Arlis, so he graduated first, and then he would move out to the Stanford area to start attending school. And then from there, he and Arlis, for about a year or so, while she finished up her senior year in high school, they kept in contact just over the phone, so they had a long-distance relationship. Arlis couldn't wait to get married to Bruce because, she just loved him and she was just super excited to be a wife. Arlis was born on February 22nd, 1955 in Bismarck, North Dakota. She was always looked at and perceived to be just the kindest soul you could ever meet. She was just someone who genuinely cared about every person she came into contact with. If you were having a bad day, she wanted to make sure it ended good. Arlis was very approachable. She was someone that would just listen and listen and listen to all of your problems, and then she would offer the best advice she could. Optimism was definitely one of her strongest suits. She always saw the best in everything and everyone, which can sometimes be dangerous, but, for the most part, she was just a compassionate, loving person. She was also an incredibly devout Christian woman. She grew up in a religious household, and at times people said this made her a little naive, that she didn't really know the real world because she was possibly a little bit sheltered. She had never really left Bismarck before or traveled too far anywhere. But she was very proud of her Christianity and her faith. She was always there to answer questions for anyone who had questions about Christianity, and she would try to essentially, for lack of a better word, recruit people to, go to church with her. Her faith was just something she carried very, very openly, and, she was never ashamed of it. Bruce apparently had the same ideals, and that's something she fell in love with. So basically the plan was once she graduated high school, she would then move out to Stanford and the two would get married. And that's exactly what happened. She graduated high school in August of 1974, and then she moved out there almost immediately afterwards, and they got married, and yeah. Arlis made friends really, really easily when she lived in Bismarck, but when she moved to Stanford, she just had a hard time doing it. I mean, in reality, the only person she knew was Bruce, but Bruce was either always in school or then he was working because, they got to pay the bills. So she spent a lot of time at home alone, super bored. So eventually she just kind of went out there and got herself a job. She became a secretary at a nearby law firm. She learned the job really quickly, she adapted really well, and everything was going great. At this point, her life, in her eyes, was perfect. She had a loving husband that she loved. She had her faith. She had a job. She was just happy as can be. But sadly, just 2 months into her new life, it would all be taken away and just absolutely obliterated. It was a quiet evening on October 12th, 1974. Arlis, around just before 11 p.m., told Bruce that, hey, I want to go mail some letters, because she would always write letters to her friends and family back in Bismarck, and she wanted to just go out, take a walk real quick, and mail them. Bruce was not a big fan of having her walk around at that late of night on her own. Even though this area was, at the time, a very safe, secure area, nothing really too crazy happened normally. But still, he wanted to go out there with her just so he could, protect her. So they left their apartment around 11 p.m. and they got to the post office to put the letters into the mailbox. And then they decided to just take, just a nice little late night stroll around campus. They had a conversation which turned a little sour because they got into just like a little tiff with regards to their vehicle. I guess their car was having some issues with the tires. And for some reason, this conversation just started a little argument. It was nothing major. It was nothing bad. Just a normal marriage spat. The argument happened sometime around 11:30 p.m., according to Bruce. At that point, Arlis said she wanted to kind of just let off some steam and go on her own. And so is this because they came across the Stanford Memorial Church, which was there on campus. And she said, you know what, I just need to take a little break from this conversation and I need to go. I want to go inside the church and I want to pray. I guess the church was open for super late hours. I don't know why, but it was. Bruce, a little hesitant at first because, again, he didn't want to leave her alone. He eventually lost that battle because their apartment was literally just it was less than half a mile from the church at this point. So he reluctantly left her on her own to go inside the church. And around 11:50 p.m., he saw her walk into the church. A security guard who patrolled that area also would say he saw her walk into the church around 11:50, as did two other witnesses who were then leaving the church at the same time Arlis was entering. Later, these two witnesses would come forward to say that at the same time Arlis walked in, a young man in his possibly mid-20s, he had sandy blonde hair, he walked in just after Arlis. They said he was wearing blue jeans and a blue short-sleeve t-shirt. Approximately 20 minutes later, the security guard, whose name is Stephen Crawford, he would walk inside the church to make sure there was no one inside. When he did, he said he didn't see anyone in there. He called out to say, hey, I'm locking the doors now. No one responded. So he went through the entire church. He locked all the doors. He walked out. And he bolted it shut. Then at approximately 12:10 a.m., which is when he did all this, he went about the rest of his duties. He would make his way back to the church every hour or so, just doing his normal rounds. Every time he did, he didn't see anything, he didn't hear anything. He looked in windows and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, according to him. Back at the apartment that Bruce and Arlis lived in, it's getting close to about 1 o'clock in the morning, and Bruce notices that Arlis still hasn't come home. He's immediately concerned, and this is the exact reason why he didn't want to leave her, because, who knows what could happen out there. So he himself takes the, less than half a mile walk back to the church on campus. He looks around the church grounds. He peers in all the windows that he can still see. It's dark in the church, so he can't see everything. He walks around the campus. He looks everywhere. He can't find her. By 3 o'clock in the morning, she still hasn't come home. He can't find any trace of her. And there's really no one else out that he can ask. He doesn't even see the security guard at any point. So he goes back to the apartment and he calls 911 to report that his wife is missing. Police actually go out to the church. They do a cursory check of the area themselves. Again, they can't enter the church because it's locked, and they don't have any kind of probable cause to go in there. They also don't see the security guard. But their checks, they don't see anything, they don't hear anything, so they themselves leave. At approximately 5:45 a.m., Stephen Crawford, the security guard, gets back to the church. When he does, he notices that one of the doors is now unlocked and partially open. As a matter of fact, one of the doors looks like it had been almost broken open. So he cautiously walks inside the church, and at first he doesn't see anything. He then turns towards the direction of the church's altar, and then he does come across something just horrific. Just one of the most gruesome images a person could see. It was the body of 19-year-old Arlis Perry. She was nude from the waist down. Her blouse was ripped open, but still technically on her. She had a broken ice pick sticking out of the left side of her head, just behind her ear, and there was a pool of blood underneath her. Between her breasts, she had a altar candle. It was like shoved in between. And protruding out of her nether regions, let's just say, was a 3-foot-long altar candle. Just someone had forced it inside of her as a form of sexually assaulting her. So Stephen Crawford calls police and he says the words, "We got a stiff one here." That's the exact thing he said to them. Police arrive and they notice that she appears to be positioned in a very odd way because she's sprawled out, so to speak. One of them made note that her legs were like kind of bent outwards. It basically in a way that almost resembled something like a pentagram. This was the 70s. The Charles Manson saga had gone on a little bit earlier in the 70s. This was sort of the decade for satanic cults of the such. And, there was sort of like that, well, did a satanic cult do this? Because this looked like a very ritualistic thing. The coroner determined that she had also been beaten pretty severely, and whoever did this to her also attempted to strangle her. But ultimately the cause of death was the ice pick sticking out of her head. On an article of clothing near her body, they noticed there was a pretty obvious male bodily fluid stain, if you know what I mean, to, again, indicate that she was sexually assaulted. They also found a partial palm print on one of the candles that was on her body. They ran the palm prints against, like, her husband. They ran it against the security guard who found her, but there was no match. The DNA that was left behind on one of the articles of clothing, you have to understand this was before DNA technology was really a thing. But thankfully, they actually kept it. They felt it would be important at some point, so they kept it and they properly stored it until whoever knows when they could run it against someone or they can test it in some capacity. So thank goodness they did. Obviously, Bruce is suspect number one. He is the husband after all, and, it's always the husband, right? So police interviewed him. He gave them his detailed account of what happened that night. He was open about the argument. He's told them about how he and she separated and went their separate ways that night. And then the rest is history. Now, they also had the testimony of the security guard, Stephen Crawford, who confirmed that Arlis walked into the church on her own. They also have the witnesses that were leaving the church who came to police and say, yep, we saw her walking into the church on her own, followed by this other man, this guy in his mid-20s, sandy blonde hair, but they didn't recognize that man. And he certainly was not her husband. There were also witnesses who saw Bruce walking on his own around, 11:50 to midnight towards the direction of his apartment. So police at that time were pretty confident that Bruce was not ruled out, but it just didn't fit the timeline of what would have been her murder. Police, they looked into this concept of it being like a satanic cult or some sort of like ritual murder. They never took that aspect very seriously, because, I mean, really, it's the main reason why people kind of speculated that theory is that it happened in a church, and the way she was found with the candles and all that, and her legs positioned in a strange way. People ran with it. They were able to link a group to Arlis that was actually from her hometown of Bismarck. It was a group called Process Church of the Final Judgment, which apparently had links to Satanism. Apparently, back in Bismarck, she had, I guess, unknowingly tried to recruit them to join her church and, in Christianity in general. I don't know if she realized this was like a borderline cult, but the theory was that they were so angry that this, Christian woman tried to recruit them, that they stalked her, and then they followed her to California, and then they murdered her. But honestly, that just sort of seems absurd. Sure, crazier things have happened, but it seems like a lot for this, like, church / whatever, I guess more of a cult, actually, for them to be so mad at this woman, this random woman, to follow her to a different state, stalk her, and then kill her. It just didn't check out. So that whole aspect really only existed primarily in rumors. Police also suspected that there was a serial killer possibly in the area, because going back about a year or so, a couple of other women were found murdered. It was actually 3 women who were murdered, and it went back to February of 1973 was the last one. But eventually, I guess, the person responsible for those 3 murders was a serial killer named John Gautreaux. But their deaths really didn't have any kind of like similarities to the way Arlis was murdered and found. So they were able to rule this individual out of committing her murder. Bruce Perry was always in the back of their minds, police, as well as Stephen Crawford. I mean, he is the man who found her, and the way he reported her was, we got a stiff one, like, it's a little cold and callous. So he always sort of kind of floated there in the back of their minds as well. But they really didn't have anything to link either man to the actual murder. Then, David Berkowitz, aka the son of Sam, well, he came into the picture. Well, he sent letters in like a package to police there in Stanford, and in that little package, a little gift package, I guess he sent them, was like a book on devil worshipping, and in the book was a little handwritten note, and the note said, quote, Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, end quote. So in the letters he sent to police, he claimed he knew who killed the Perry girl. He claimed it was someone who was calling themselves Manson number 2. Nice. And this Manson number 2 fella was part of a satanic cult. Berkowitz honestly could have just written that whole little scribbled note himself, and this honestly was just probably him trying to toy with police. He probably caught wind of the whole like rumors of satanic ritual stuff with this murder, so he wanted to like have some fun. They did have investigators though go out to question him and interview him, and they determined that pretty much he was just doing just that, pulling their leg. Yeah. Okay, so what about the sandy blonde hair individual? What about him? Well, who knows? They were never able to find out who that person was. They released information to the public. That person never came forward. So they really had nothing. At this point, it was more of just a figment of someone's imagination. This sandy blonde-haired fella going into the church after Arlis. But there is some credence to this person because apparently at some point before the murders, obviously before the murder, Mike, at Arlis's work, a young man would walk in and have like some sort of argument or heated conversation with Arlis that the people at work just assumed was her husband because she never said who it was, apparently. Later, they would find out that when they actually saw Arlis's husband in person at like her funeral, they realized, oh, that wasn't him. It was a sandy blonde-haired young individual. So that does line up with this man who may have followed her into the church. But again, they had no information on who he actually was, where they could find him, and he never came forward. Was the murder even done by someone a part of a satanic cult? Could it have just been staged to make it look like that? More than likely, yes, because that would definitely throw police off the scent. After a couple of years, they have nothing. They can't run any kind of DNA evidence because it doesn't really exist yet. They've interviewed hundreds of people. They've gotten really nothing. The husband is looking less and less likely a suspect. And the case just goes cold. And it goes really cold. Ice cold. It would actually not be until 2018, 44 years later, when they reopen it. While looking through all of the evidence, again, kind of starting from scratch, the new detectives on the case, this cold case force, they realized they still had this collected clothing item with possible some sort of substance on it, which would later be determined as male bodily fluid. So they're like, holy smokes. So they test it, and it doesn't match anyone right away. But they also realize that like a decade or so after the murder took place, apparently they did collect DNA from both Bruce and Stephen Crawford, the security guard. So, but even still back then, they couldn't have the technology that says like, yep, this is an exact match. So in 2018, they ran the DNA found next to her body against Bruce Perry and against Stephen Crawford. And they got a match. The male bodily fluid left just next to her body belonged to Stephen Crawford, the security guard who found her. Stephen Crawford, like I said, was always just sort of a person of interest, floating in the back of police's minds, just like Bruce Perry. But they didn't have anything to really charge him with anything or even directly accuse him. But now they have their guy. Stephen Crawford was hired by the, campus police department or whatever the case may be back in 1971. He was actually a U.S. Air Force veteran, and when he first got hired on, he was sort of like a higher ranking person, but apparently a new chief came in and decided that he wanted to restructure the entire department. So Stephen Crawford was demoted to just a run-of-the-mill security guard. Something he did not like. He was very openly not happy with it. He was very disgruntled about it. He complained every day to his friends and family with regards to it. He hated it. I mean, people just said he was incredibly resentful, very spiteful, and very pissed that they were doing this to him. So in 2018, when they got the DNA hit, police would theorize that This hatred, this anger towards the university police department, this would cause him to act out of anger and rage. And that anger finally boiled over. And when it did, he found himself alone in a church with a 19-year-old girl named Arlis Perry. She was the unlucky one to fall into his pathway when everything just snapped for him. She was not specifically targeted. This was not a planned thing. She was just there, and it happened. He locked himself inside the church with her, and then he proceeded to beat her and strangle her so that he could sexually assault her. And then he ended up taking an ice pick, I guess he had, and drove it into her skull. And then he would do the stuff with the candles and pose her to sort of make it look, because it happened in a church, so make it look like some sort of ritualistic thing and no one would suspect him. He would call 911 to report it so that, again, it didn't look like he was the one who did it. He apparently would break through the door to, again, take suspicion away from him because he had keys. Why would he break out of the place when he had keys to the building? Police would look through his files and realize that in 1992, he was charged with theft because back in the 70s, after the murder, they believed he had stolen some bronze statues and other artifacts off of the Stanford campus, again, out of anger. And then by 1992, he was finally caught for that and charged with it. I don't know if he served any time, though, for it. He was interviewed kind of over the years about the murder, but again, he always denied it. And again, they never really had the solid proof. So every time they had to just sort of cut him loose. By 2018, Crawford is now a 72-year-old man living on his own in a little apartment building. And his neighbors would all describe him as someone who was just extremely normal, very irregular. He kept to himself. He didn't bother anyone, but he was always super friendly. Like if he saw you, he would give you a wave and a smile. And nothing seemed out of sorts with him. Unbeknownst to all of these people, the man they were getting a nice little smile and wave from was a sadistic murderer. A man who defiled and destroyed a young newlywed back in 1974. When the DNA finally matched, they were able to get a warrant for his arrest. On June 28, 2018, police would approach his apartment. As they managed to get the door open, they see Stephen there, and he gets up and he pulls out a handgun. He then puts it against his own head. He knows why police are there. He knows that it is time to pay for what he did. But he wasn't going to give Arlis's family that satisfaction. At 9:04 a.m. on June 28, 2018, Stephen Crawford would pull the trigger and fire a bullet into his own brain. And he would fall to the floor, dead. In his apartment, they actually found a book that actually, in this book, mentions and talks about in detail the murder, the then unsolved murder of Arlis Perry. And in the sleeve of the book, they found a note. Turns out it was a suicide note that he had written 2 years prior. So apparently the guilt had gotten to him over the years, and then he finally did it. Arlis's family, understandably, was very distraught over the outcome because that means that Arlis and her family would not get their day in court. They would not get proper justice because he's dead. At the same time, he's dead, so he can't hurt anyone anymore. What's worse is that Arlis's dad had passed away just 2 years before this revelation, so he died not knowing ever officially what happened to his daughter. Her mother was 88 years old at the time. She was alive as well as her siblings. And so they all at least got to see the answers come to fruition. It's just they really wish there was actual justice. Bruce, at the time, I believe is still now, still alive. He is I think a psychiatrist. The only photo I can find of him, or photos of him like nowadays, I couldn't really find any younger photos of him. But he was very pleased with the fact that they finally caught the person. Upset, of course, that again, he's not getting the justice she deserved, but, you know, he was happy to know that they found their answers. This sort of thing, you know, was pretty common for cases before the 90s, really. Like, you know, the one thing that could probably catch this killer is DNA, but DNA really wasn't in existence. So nowadays, thankfully, if you may have noticed, we're seeing a lot more of these like super older cases being solved, or Jane or John Doe's being identified thanks to DNA. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this, higher rate of these cold cases being solved because of the advancements of our DNA technology. I wish this story had a better ending. Like, I wish he was rotting in a jail cell for the remainder of his life. But at least he can't hurt anyone anymore, so there is that. And that is it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. Per the usual, you can catch more stories of true crime here right on YouTube. I have a whole bunch of videos over here, so please give this video a like, a comment, and give me a subscription. That's not the word. Now I post long videos every Sunday and every Wednesday, and then I post short form videos every Monday and Tuesday, and I will post shorts just sort of scattered throughout the week when I see fit. Please also give me a follow on Facebook and Twitter. That can be found in the link tree below. If there's a case you would like me to cover, please send me an email to mikey@truecrimerer.com, which is listed below. Please go to my link tree and check my case list first. Make sure the name you want me to cover isn't already on there. If it's not, then send me just the name, where it happened, when it happened, and I'll add it to the list when I see the email. If you already see the name, please don't send me it again. It's on there. It'll be covered at some point. I pick these cases at random, so eventually it'll get covered. I just don't know when. Next, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and a wine glass and other little things. Also in the link tree below, we do ship internationally all over the world, but not the universe. Sorry, we do not have that technology yet. Lastly, if you have a Discord and you want to join my Discord server, it's also linked below. Please feel free to join, but also please be over the age of 18. Otherwise, you will be given the old kickaroony out of the roomeroonies, the Discorder. I'm an idiot. Alright, True Crime Maroonies, that is it for this video. Well, until the next case. Do you think Arya and Gollum make a good couple? Do you think they would, like, I mean, they're the, look at that. Do you think they would make a good, what are you doing, Mike? What is this? This is some weird cause, this is like what, some sort of like fan fiction I'm doing? What's going on? This is not, I'm trying to end the video.